Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. People that are in attendance and people that are attending remotely. My name is Chuck Homeowner. I'm the Director of Regulatory Programs for the Commission. And notwithstanding the insinuations, I have not been here very long. Actually, yes, I've been here a long time. Someone once referred to me recently as the pop of the Pinelands Commission staff. I've just finished 35 years with the Commission, so I have been here a long time. I'd like to give a brief overview today of our regulations. Providing such an overview of regulations is not an exciting thing to do, and we recognize that, so we'll try to keep the pace up. After I make a few comments, Ernie Demon of our staff will provide some information, and then April Fields, our Chief Permit Administrator, will also provide some information. So what the regulatory program staff does, by its nature, we will file applications, and the Regulatory Programs Office reviews those applications and thereby regulates development in the Pinelands. Just about anything you can imagine constitutes development in the Pinelands. If I'm just doing a subdivision and I'm not physically building anything, that meets the definition of development and requires an application to the Pinelands Commission. If I'm proposing a change of use in an existing structure, that constitutes development. So in both the Pinelands Comprehensive Management Plan and your local ordinance, there's a definition of development, and it's very wide ranging. All development in the Pinelands area has to be consistent with the standards that are contained in the Pinelands Plan. Ernie Demon and April Field will discuss those standards in a few moments. A couple things I just wanted to note of import is that when we receive an application, we attempt to advise applicants how to make it consistent with our rules. That may seem obvious, but sometimes it isn't, because applicants believe that we're not telling them a way to make their application consistent. And our staff is very experienced, and if there's a way to tell someone how to revise their application to make it consistent with our rules, we will do that. And the other thing that I just wanted to note was, and this comes up more often than you would think, is that the staff cannot approve development proposals that are not consistent with our rules. Now, some of the proposals that come before us, an initial review of them would say, well, that makes sense. But the staff has to review the development proposals in accordance with the rules. If we want to change the rules to allow something to happen, that's the appropriate process. But for example, if someone comes to us and says, here's my housing project, and I have this 2 acres of wetlands in the middle of my housing project. I'd like to fill that in and build my houses there. And then I would like to go buy land elsewhere and preserve it for the Pinelands. And that proposal may make sense, but our rules aren't structured to do that. That's just an example. I'm not suggesting they should do that, but so applicants will become frustrated at times and say, well, what's wrong with that Pinelands Commission staff? They won't propose it and it makes such good sense. And we try to advise those applicants, no, really, this is a question of revising the Commission's rule to allow it, and the commissioners that we work for, the board that meets each month, has to make those decisions. There are certain development activities that do not require application of the Pinelands Commission. They're on our website, they're in your municipal ordinance. Right now, I think there's probably close to 25 of them that are itemized in both our rules and in your municipal ordinance of different activities that do not require an application to the Pinelands Commission. The first one on this list and the last one on this list are the ones we use the most. The first one's talking about accessory structures to existing houses, pools, basketball courts, patios, concrete pads, anything that's accessory to a dwelling does not require application of the Pinelands Commission. Not up here is additions to existing single-family dwellings do not require application of the Pinelands Commission. And the last one on this list is important to note, which is agricultural structures. So if I want to build a barn for my farm, any other type of agricultural structure you can think of, a pump house for my cranberry bog, all those types of activities do not require application of the Pinelands Commission. The one caveat to all of that is they still have to meet what we refer to generally as the environmental standards of the Pinelands Plan. So although I can build a basketball court accessory to my house, and it doesn't require application of the Pinelands Commission, I can't build that basketball court in wetlands. The last slide I just wanted to note is that, and this we used Galloway Township as our example here. So we have the Pinelands Comprehensive Management Plan regulations, and we have the Galloway Township Land Use Ordinance, that's on the bottom. Almost every regulation that's in the Pinelands Comprehensive Management Plan is in the Galloway Township Land Use Ordinance, and this holds true for all 53 municipalities. So if someone's talking to you or to us about a provision that's in the Pinelands Comprehensive Management Plan and whether they're meeting or not, it's also in your municipal land use ordinance. This is Galloway Townships. The colors represent their different management areas in the township. Paul touched on this briefly. Yellow is rural development area. Brown is agricultural management area. Red is Pinelands Village. So this is showing that the municipalities take those management areas and the little small letters, I hope you can read them. Those are the local zoning districts that the township has assigned to those management areas. So when you're in one of the orange areas that are a regional growth area, a municipality is zoning those, some areas for residential high density, some areas residential low density, some areas industrial, some areas as commercial. Zoning just as in any other municipality in the state of New Jersey. With that, I'd like to introduce Ernst Dean, who's a supervisor in our office, and he'll spend a little bit of time discussing our standards.
Thank you, Chuck. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Ernst Dean. I'm going to go over some of the application review standards, not all of them, but some of them real quick, and also the application review procedures and how they differ for private and public development. One of the major things that tends to impact potential development projects in the Pinelands is wetland buffers. Our rules prohibit almost all development in wetland and wetland buffers. In addition to that, well, I already said this, but in addition to wetlands, your buffer can be up to 300 feet. Certain development is permitted in wetland and wetland buffers if certain conditions are met, specifically linear development activities such as roads, sewer mains, and water mains. Paul mentioned earlier that the Pinelands has very interesting animals. Some of those are threatened and endangered species. Our standards differ if it's a threatened or endangered plant or animal. For threatened and endangered plants, the development project has to be designed so it will not impact any local population if there is one on the parcel. With animals, it's slightly different. The project has to be designed to avoid habitat that's critical to survival of any local population of the teeming animal species. Another common one is groundwater quality and septic system standards. In certain parts of the Pinelands, you cannot be serviced by sanitary sewer. It's not permitted. Any use, whether it's commercial or residential, has to be served by a septic system. Some of the standards include any septic system that's proposed has to be located in an area that you have at least 5 feet of what's called a seasonal water table. We require 3.2 acres to use a standard septic system. We will allow you to go down to 1 acre if you utilize one of our approved alternate design septic systems. And then finally, for non-residential development, the acreage isn't set, but it is depending upon the flow that's coming out of the proposed use. That determines how many acres that you need to meet the water quality standards. And then finally, again, I'm not going over all the standards, the ones that are most common, is our stormwater management standards. Of course, anytime somebody proposes anything that's considered right now major development, they have to address our stormwater standards, whether that's residential or commercial. Some of the most common things they have to address are we require that you store and infiltrate the 10-year storm over 24-hour duration. What that pretty much means is depending on as you increase the acres of your development, you're increasing this volume of water that you have to retain on your site and infiltrate. We also care about reducing the stormwater runoff rates for certain storms. And then finally, we make sure that you're siting in suitable soils, both in two ways. One is that you have a sufficient depth below the basin to the seaside water table, just like we did for septic systems. And then finally, to ensure that they're going to function, is we make sure you have a permeability rate between typically what's called 1 and 20 inches per hour. Make sure that they function, but they're not so fast that they're going to impact water quality. As Paul mentioned earlier, the commission does not approve private development. The commission does approve public development. So what we have here is just a quick little synopsis of how the commission staff reviewed private development. And real quickly, info is submitted to the commission. Upon completion of an application, the staff will issue that certificate of filing, which, as mentioned earlier, allows an applicant to move forward with municipal and county permits or approvals. Those permits or approvals do not take effect until they're submitted back to the commission's office, and we issue a letter allowing them to take effect. For public development, it's quite different. Again, if information is submitted to the commission, upon submission of the complete application, it's placed on the agenda for the commissioners to hear it and for the public to comment if they have any. After that meeting occurs, the staff prepares a report, and it's at the next available commission meeting for action. At that point, the project is done. It's actually approved by resolution. As Chuck mentioned, I'm going to give this to April right now.
Hello, everybody. I'm April Field. I'm the Chief Permit Administrator. As Chuck mentioned earlier, our rules in the CNP are also within all 53 municipalities' land use ordinances. So anything that's a violation of our rules is typically a violation of your local land use ordinance. Typical violations we encounter can be vegetation clearing, either in uplands, wetlands, or wetland buffers. Seems to be a very popular one that we deal with nowadays. Another thing that we see a lot of is development without application. Paving a dirt parking area without application, expanding a commercial building without application. Those are frequent violations we have. When I was first hired here in June of 2000, back in the day, I was hired as a regulatory program specialist, and one of my sole functions was to help coordinate the pursuit of these violations. And I very quickly learned that the Pinelands Commission has no direct enforcement authority. Just as Paul mentioned earlier, we do not have the ability to levy fines or issue scary violation notices to people. So it makes our job here quite challenging. We have all these wonderful rules and regulations, but we have very limited means by which to pursue violations of those rules. So one of the main ways we rely on pursuing the violations is to coordinate with local officials. We frequently will visit sites with local officials. We will ask municipalities to issue violation notices in response to violations. We will write support letters in response to violation notices. We will provide expert court testimony and help local zoning officials, code enforcement, construction code officials pursue violations. That seems to be the best means we have to pursue people who don't follow the rules. When we write these violation letters, one thing I wanted to mention, we always make a habit of copying local officials on all of the violation letters we send. So we want to make sure that we keep close communication with towns and keep them involved in that process. And so what we frequently do is we send all of our violation letters via email, and we copy typically the local town clerk on those violation letters, and we include a list of carbon copy CCs on that violation letter, and we ask the clerk to disperse that letter accordingly to municipal officials. So in hopes that we can work together and keep everybody informed of what's going on. So Paul mentioned earlier that we have this wonderful website full of all of these helpful tools. And I wanted to take some time to go through some of these tools that I think would both be helpful to you as municipal officials and also might help you answer questions when posed by the public. One of the things on our website is our application forms. And if you look at the top of our webpage, there's a large black toolbar. I'm not sure if you can see it here, but at the top of our webpage, it says applications. And then if you click on that, there's a forms page. And on that forms page, we have 3 types of application forms. We have our main application for development. That's the most frequently used application form. That's the one that people typically complete when they're proposing development in the Pinelands area. And then we have 2 other application forms. We have one for our off-road vehicle events. That would be an enduro going through most likely state forest lands. And then we also have an application form for Pinelands development credits. Another tool that we have on our website is we have this section on our webpage called Guidelines and Tools. You can get to that by clicking on the applications bar at the top of the screen and then clicking on the word guidance. And it takes you to this gigantic chart of all of these different guidance documents, which is a little bit overwhelming. On that chart, we have a bunch of different forms, including a cheat sheet that I like to refer people to. I think this is one of the most useful tools as a zoning or code enforcement official you can give to the public. It's a list of all of the exemptions that Chuck talked about earlier. It explains all of the things that do not require application to the commission. You can get to that here. If you just click on this hyperlink, this slideshow will be posted on our website after this. And if you click on this hyperlink, it'll also take you to that page. That cheat sheet is really helpful. It gives all different scenarios about all the different things that do not require application to the commission. Another thing in this section is a list of our local approval checklist. When we send out a certificate of filing, we typically include a hyperlink to this checklist as well. It is a reminder to people that when they get their certificate of filing, it is not an approval to build. And once you get your approvals from the county or the municipality, it's important that you submit copies of those things, those permits and approvals, along with other documents that may be required. For instance, if I get a municipal subdivision approval, we'd like a copy of the approved subdivision plan. And so this checklist tells people exactly what needs to be submitted to us after you receive your municipal or county permits and approvals, and the information will be needed to complete our review and then sign off on the proposed development. Other things that are on this page also include our public development and waiver deadlines. The commission meets monthly, and there are different deadlines for submission of public development applications and waivers, and it also explains when the public comment process will begin and end, and the deadlines by which need to be met to meet certain commission meeting dates. And then all throughout on the page as well, we also have a multitude of different guidance documents that deal with sample deeds and notices as part of different types of development applications. We also have documents regarding our wetlands and our wetland buffer models. So I would encourage everybody to check out this webpage. There's just so many different documents on it. And if you ever have someone in your office asking about a particular document that they need with regard to our application review, it's most likely on this guidelines and tools page. This is where we keep most things in our regulatory programs department. As part of our applications, we require an application fee. And it can be quite complicated to determine what the application fee is for certain types of development. We include a chart on our application form, but it can be quite confusing. The easiest way to determine what your required application fee is by using this fee calculator. And I think for some reason people don't know it's there, but I'm going to point you to it now, and I hope that you point anyone that comes into your offices to this calculator, because our staff uses it to help calculate the fees at times when they're very complicated. This fee calculator can be found under applications and then fees, and then on this it guides you through a list of questions and answers as to what you're proposing. And if you put in what you're proposing at the end and you hit calculate, it will spit out what your application fee is. A lot of times, some of our more savvy applicants will actually use this calculator and then print out their result and attach it to their application form. And I find that quite helpful. Another thing that is on our application page is our application status reports. These can be quite helpful to the public, and we rely on them heavily to help keep the public aware of where their applications are with regard to status. So there's 3 different reports here. One is our public applications, one is our waiver applications, and we also have development application activity status. The public and waiver reports establish a process by which we inform the public of where the application is. It will explain to them whether it's in review and whether it's up for public comment, and when the public comment period closes, and when the public comment period opens and when it closes. The application activity report is a summary of a 2-week period. For the last 2 weeks, it explains exactly where the applications are that we have received and any information that has been received in the past 2 weeks on any application. It's a very concise list of all of the different things that have been received in this 2-week period, and our exact responses and the dates by which we responded to things. And the next thing I want to do is review our interactive map. That's going to help guide me to our website. So this interactive map is posted on our website right around the time we went remote during COVID. And I'm glad that it was posted when it was. It should have been posted earlier than that, but it proved essential during remote working. It helped answer a lot of public questions, since we were very, when the offices closed, we were very limited as to how much we could communicate with the public, with the phone lines being down and that sort of thing. So this tool is a really helpful tool in explaining to people very limited general information with regard to a property they may be interested in. So if you have questions regarding a particular piece of land, or if someone walks into your office and has questions regarding a piece of land, this is the first place you should always check. I think it's an essential tool and one that we use quite frequently in the review of applications. So you can find this on our website. If you go on our front web page, but if you go on our webpage and you click on there, the globe on the bottom of the front webpage of our screen, and this, it's a hyperlink to this interactive map. I'll type in our address. So you can search by any property in two ways. You can search by block and lot, you can search by address. So I typed in the address, which is what I think most people would do frequently. You can also search by block and lot by clicking in this. You can't really see it. Let me see if I can. By clicking here. You click here, you can put in your municipality and you can select your block, and then you can actually select multiple lots at the same time. So if you're looking at a parcel that has 20 different lots, you can select them all and hit apply and they'll all pop up. So when you first put in an address, it brings you to this colored screen, which can be quite confusing for people that are unfamiliar with our Pinelands area and some of the different layers. And the first thing I always do, and I think some people still have trouble finding, this first screen under this I is a list of just general instructions. So this is kind of a cheat sheet as to what all of these little icons and buttons do. So that's your general reference. And then the first thing I always do is click on this folder here, which if you see here, it says layer list. And this is going to be the way to turn on different layers, or what people refer to as different things you want to look at. Essentially, that's what layers are in non-GIS terminology. So when I put in my block and lot, I can then turn things on and off. So if you notice all of the colors, that's because our management areas are showing. So if I zoom out a little bit, you'll see that you have a multitude of management areas just in this general vicinity. And so I'm going to turn them off for a minute, and then I'm going to turn on our aerial imagery. We have 2020 aerial imagery and 2015 aerial imagery here. And I'll zoom in again so we can see ourselves. And if you see here, here's the Pinelands Commission building. This is the building we're in right now. And so when I have my parcel or my block and lot, I can then find out all sorts of different information using this tool. And they're all listed in these layers over here on the left. And so I can click each of them on and off through each of these different check boxes. So when I'm looking at this, and let's say I want to figure out what zoning district I'm in, the first thing I need to do is click on the town that I'm in. So we're in Pemberton Township. So I'm going to find Pemberton Township on this bottom layer here. I'm going to click it on. And this is how I turn on my Pemberton Township zoning. And so if I zoom out a little bit, it'll show me all the different zoning districts in Pemberton Township. Now, one of the things that I don't think is apparent to the user that we'd like to work on and enhancing someday, but this is a work in progress, is that there's always more information hidden when you click on things. So if I were to click here and I wanted to know more about the zoning, you can always click on the individual property and it will tell you more information. So for instance, if I click back on our property and it's really hard to notice, but there is an arrow right here and it says 1 of 2, so that's your hint that there's more to be found. If you click on this arrow, it'll then take you to more information. One of my favorite things that this does is when you're in this zoning layer, there's a hyperlink directly to Pinelands ordinance. So if I click on this, so we're in the PV zone, if I click here, it'll open up Pinelands ordinance, and then I can go and find the PV zone and look for what the requirements are in that zoning district. That is hidden. I hope that we can make it more prevalent to the user someday, but I think it's one of the most useful tools we have and one that I use regularly when I'm reviewing applications. One of the other things we are frequently asked, and I know as municipal officials, you're probably asked all the time, are there wetlands on my property? And this is a tool that we can use to help guide people with regard to their properties. So if you look here on the left, you have wetlands and wetland buffers. So you'll see in blue here is a wetlands layer. And then we have an approximate 300-foot buffer layer. The one thing I want to underline and bold in saying is this map is only a guide. It's a very frequent misconception that this map is gospel, meaning that this is the exact location of wetlands and wetland buffers. This is just initial cursory review, gives us an idea of where wetlands or wetland buffers may be. I have been in the field and this map sometimes is spot on and sometimes it is completely bonkers and not even close.
Like a tax map.
So I just want to make sure that it's clear to people, we do not use this map solely in making decisions with regard to wetlands and wetland buffers. As part of any development application, we would have somebody flag them and identify them in the field, and we would verify it as part of an application to distinguish exactly where those wetland and wetland buffers are. This, though, is a wonderful tool to use when doing that initial review to see, could I maybe build on my lot? Because if I wanted to build over here, for instance, it's telling me that there's a good chance that this is all wetlands and maybe that's not the property to buy if I'm thinking of buying one versus something out here where there's no wetlands. But it's just, but anytime you're in that close zone, in the maybe the approximate 300-foot buffer or on the edge of wetlands, I would encourage you to take that with a grain of salt because it's not always exactly right. But it does give you a good, window when just trying to do that first review and determine where you might want to build something.
Are you doing it on your own?
I am,
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how do you get the block and lot pulled up on it?
The block and lot pulled up?
Oh, the numbers?
Yeah.
So I just click on the individual lots. So if I click here, it tells me that this is block 846, lot 1.01. If I click on this one, it tells me it's block 845, lot 18.
I'm not getting that.
I have to take a look after the meeting. I'll help you out.
Is that good for
It is, yeah.
So one of the other layers that we have, our newest layer that we just added most recently is this permanent land protection restrictions layer. And I think this is going to be a very helpful tool in the public too, when trying to determine where they can and can't build in the Pinelands. If you click on this, it shows you land that has been permanently protected in some way, shape, or form, and restricted. And those restrictions may or may not prevent them from building what they want to on a particular piece of land. If you notice over here, I probably forgot to mention too, there's these little arrows on the very left of this check boxes. And if you click on them, you can then see the legend for what you're looking at. that. So that's important. You can use that for a couple different things here. Even the zoning, if I go down to Pemberton zoning and I were to put that on, it'll show me all of the zoning districts. So for permanent land protection, if you take this little legend and you look at it, you'll notice that right next to the Pinelands Commission offices here, we have land that's been permanently protected for farmland preservation purposes. And if you look over here, we have another piece of ground that's been permanently protected as part of a PDC severance. So if you zoom out a little bit more, you get to a bigger glimpse at all of the land that's being protected in the Pinelands in some way, shape, or form. And this is important when we're reviewing applications and I have someone proposing development on a piece of ground. This is a really helpful tool to determine whether or not they could potentially build something on that lot. It doesn't mean that they can't build. What it says to me is there's probably some sort of deed restriction or easement associated with that property. So it's important to read that deed restriction or easement to determine whether or not what they're proposing would be consistent with that easement. Some, for instance, our PDC severances do permit some activities like agriculture on the property. So it doesn't mean you can't build, it just means that you can't do certain things. I think that about covers it. Does anybody have any questions regarding that?
I do. I just have a question. The wetlands that are indicated on your map, I believe, and got this from a lot of residents, that differs from other DEP wetlands maps.
They do.
Substantially sometimes.
They do substantially.
What is the source of it?
So the source of that, and we took a very conservative approach on that. I'm not sure how long ago, but years ago when in developing that. And we did that because we use this as a guide. We wanted to take the most conservative approach we could. So we would at least as a heads up to if there might be wetlands, and we wanted to know that firsthand. So to do that, since that mapping can be all over the place, to be more restrictive, we took DEP's wetlands mapping and then we combined it with hydric soils on the individual soils maps and made our own layer. So that's what that is. It's our own creation. It doesn't exist anywhere else. So a lot of times people, as part of an application, will submit a DEP wetlands map and said, where'd you get these wetlands from? I'm looking at IMAP or whatever DEP's mapping sources, I always forget the name of it. And it looks totally different, GeoWeb, and looks totally different, and say, well, we have a more conservative map. That's not because we're trying to call the entire Pinelands area wetlands. It's just to be a heads up for that cursory review. I think it's more advantageous to know whether or not wetlands may be involved in an application and just have that in the back of your mind in the forefront than to be surprised later on and go, oh my gosh, there's wetlands. So we thought a more conservative approach would be helpful. We use that mapping for all different types of applications too, and even Pinelands development credit applications and LOIs and things. So we've just found it's helpful to be more conservative. Any other questions?
Yeah, pretty much asked my question.
Okay.
It's definitely a frequent question on both in the planning side of the world and the application side of the world. We'll get down to redevelopers, here's my wetlands map, and we'll say, well, that's DEP's wetlands map.
Yeah.
Here's what you need to do to, in the Pinelands area is different, so.
Well,
And so this is
So
meant to
saying-
be used really to help people understand that.
The old saying, there's two sides to each story, right? And then the truth.
Okay, yeah. Chuck just reminded me too, the reason we take a more conservative approach too is we have an addendum to, the wetlands manual in the Pinelands, and that's also on that guidelines and tools section. And when we're reviewing what a wetland is. There's a different definition of what a wetland is in the Pinelands area than there is anywhere else in the state. So what DEP may call a wetland outside of the Pinelands is different than what we would call a wetland here. And that's because our manual dictates that we use a different approach, and we don't have to meet the 3-parameter approach that most, you know, if you're familiar with, you know, how wetlands are defined outside the state in the Pinelands area. So because of that, a wetland could be a wetland here that wouldn't necessarily be a wetland outside of that area. So for those reasons, we decided to take a more conservative approach with that GIS mapping.
It might be helpful to the public to put that explanation on those maps,
That's a good point.
Yeah,
because I get the question, like, look, this map, it's so much different than this map.
okay, yeah.
Yeah, maybe when you pop up the wetlands layer, to be one of the little things that others
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, that's a good idea,
This
really
is
is.
different, do not use the DEP map.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We get asked that a lot.
And it's still gotta be verified, so
Sure.
it's
Like I said, this was something that we'd had in our vision for a while. We had it developed and we were in the process of finessing it, and then COVID hit, and we said, well, we better put something out there to help the public, so something's better than nothing. But it's definitely a work in progress, and I think as we use it, we'll identify better ways to enhance it and finesse it. So I would welcome any feedback. If you have any feedback like that, please feel free to pass it along to any of us, and we can see if we can work with our GIS team to continue, you know, enhancing it. You know, we just added this permanent land protection layer, for instance, and we have plans to potentially, hopefully, add additional layers in the future as people use it. I think that's all I had with regard to helpful tools, unless anybody has any other questions about anything we have available on our website that I discussed.
Any other presenters at this point?
The one thing I wanted to do, I have one more thing I wanted to
Sure.
do. I wanted to hand it over to Ernie. He wants to go over some common situations that we deal with in rent programs. We have frequent questions that we get, and I thought it might be helpful to some of you to go over
Great.
some common scenarios.
So I'm gonna admit, obviously, there's been a lot of talking, you know, through the last hour and a half. Trying to find a way to get more interaction. Obviously, this is I'll be honest, it's a small group compared to what we've had in the past. You've heard recently that certain activities don't require an application to the commission. They're considered development, but they're exempt under 4.1. So in order to get maybe some back and forth communication, this will probably be, you know, expanded in the future, but this was very short notice. You know, we're very busy. So I thought I'd put together a few things that are very common. Municipalities see them all the time, and how to react to these. So I'll just go over, I didn't want to make it a quiz. I'm not going to take somebody's thunder.
It's okay, Ernie.
Oh,
So a homeowner proposes the installation of a pool for their dwelling. This is very simple. That's a structure accessory to a single family dwelling. It's clearly outlined under 4.1 as an activity that doesn't require an application to the commission. Trump mentioned earlier, it still has to meet environmental standards. So one thing that typically comes up for a situation like this is, as April just showed you, are there wetland or potentially wetland buffers on a parcel where somebody's proposing this? And is there a possible conflict where you as municipal officials may need to ask for further information? A dwelling was damaged by fire, and the owner wishes to demolish and build a new dwelling. Now here it's a little bit more complicated, because you have to ask yourself, was this dwelling less than 50 years old when it's being requested to be demolished? If it is, again, that does not require an application to the commission. And the reconstruction of that dwelling within 5 years of its demolition does not require an application to this office. The answer is the same, except that this dwelling is 50 years old or older, In that case, you need to inform the property owner that they need to come to the commission with an application for the demolition of that structure. But again, we will note in that certificate of filing they're going to get that as long as they rebuild within 5 years, excuse me, geez, within 5 years, it doesn't require a formal application to the commission to reconstruct the dwelling. Let's say you have a road, it's in terrible shape. You wish to repave that road. Do you need to apply to the commission? The easy answer is again, no. This is where it's really beneficial to read that 4.1 section of the CMP. If you're going to read any section, that's the most important one to read. Provided that you repave that road to its existing width, you don't have to bother us, we don't have to bother you. Finally, this one's a little bit more complicated. You have somebody come in with an existing commercial use. They say, look, I want to put solar panels over my parking lot. Okay, you read the CMP. It says accessory solar facilities on top of either an existing structure or on a parking lot. So now you need to ask the question, is what they're proposing accessory to their use? If it is, it would not require an application to the commission. Now, this is where it's a little bit more complicated because now you're asking detailed information and normally you wouldn't be. If you determine that that solar facility would provide more power than what would be accessory to that use, then that very well might trigger an application before the commission. And actually, that's it. But
Real quick,
But next year we'll think of more.
You mentioned
as I do have more, I whittled it down a little bit.
you mentioned dwellings burning down in 5 years. What happens if they're commercial and residential together? Like you have a commercial business out front and your residences are in the back on some of these older towns. And they're going over 50 years as well.
So the demolition of the structure, and I think Chuck would tell you, this is where it gets a little bit complicated. If the structure is still there and it needs to be demolished, it would require an application to the commission because it's 50 years old or older. Now, unfortunately, since it's not a residential structure specifically or only, the reconstruction of that, well, this is very complicated. If somebody wanted to rebuild only the residential,
Part of it, or square footage of it.
well, if they only wanted to build a house again, I would have to say that that probably would not.
That's correct.
But if they wanted to rebuild the house and the commercial, that would require an application to the commission.
That's still 5-year type.
For the house, right.
For the house.
For the house, if it was-
5 years, yep.
Right.
But if they want to rebuild everything that was there, submit an application.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, one more question with regard to house fires. House is over 50 years old and the fire destroys the house. There's nothing left. They still need a demolition permit by the commission.
Yes, please.
So there's some professional judgment involved there, obviously.
Okay.
So really that depends on the extent of damage. If there's no structure left, there's no need to apply to the Pinelands Commission.
If it's an unsafe structure, then yeah.
Unsafe structure is a different issue.
Right.
But
Still
unsafe
safe.
structure,
It's just rotted
the
away.
executive director can make a determination that it's a public safety hazard and it can come down immediately. But it's the shades of gray syndrome about how much damage until it's effectively destroyed. And we have to make those judgments. There's no cookie cutter answer to that one.
Fair enough.
Any other questions?
Comment was made during the presentation that if an applicant didn't like the rules, that they could petition the commission to change the rules. In 25 years, how many applicants have been successful in persuading the commission to change the rule?
Well, let me help with a couple of terms there, bureaucratic terms, but I would say many municipalities, I don't know how many individuals have been successful in coming to the commission and discussing rules, and we amend our rules constantly. The term used, petition, I would say very few over 40 some years. A petition is this formal process where Chuck Horner actually writes an amendment to the rules and files it with the Pinelands Commission. That has proven not to be a course that's very successful. But individuals expressing their concerns about different rules, and ultimately, as the commission goes through, every 5 years, the commission's obligated to review its rules, and suggestions and recommendations that come up from individuals and municipal officials and county officials find their way into amendments to our rules. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
I just had one question that I had gotten that somebody's watching remotely that I needed to answer, which was, this was from Christopher Zender, who's a committeeman in Chemung Township, and his question was, how the school commission's stormwater rules, are they affected by redevelopment plans? And there's a pretty straightforward answer, which is the stormwater rules apply to all development, whether it's redevelopment plans or new development, in the same manner. And in our rules for stormwater, if you have an existing developed site, whether you call it redevelopment or not, you have a paved parking lot, a 5-acre paved parking lot, and you're proposed to build housing on that site, you do get credit for the fact that there's pavement there and the runoff that's already occurring. So there's no distinction between new development and redevelopment, but both get credit for existing site conditions. So I hope I answered his question. Any other questions?
How many callers do we have, or how many?
I can check. What I'll do, Mayor, is screen share the call-in number, and then we can wait a few moments to see if we get the callers, and then we can go from there.